Welcome to Andy Staples on 3. Happy Monday. We are back home from Big Ten Media Days. It was a very educational trip. Got something coming out at On 3 on first-year coaches and talked to quite a few of those at Big Ten Media Days. You heard last week Curt Cignetti from Indiana, Jedd Fisch at Washington, Deshaun Foster from UCLA. There was also Jonathan Smith, who just started at Michigan State. So we got to talk about those guys this week. This is going to be a very busy week for the coaches themselves, for the players, because this is the week that practice starts for most teams. Like Florida State, those week 0 teams they're playing, they're already practicing. They've been practicing for a few days now. The teams that open on Thursday of week 1, they're starting today. Everybody will be rolling by the end of the week. We are very, very close to the 2024 season. We're close to actual football product. Well, I cannot wait because I don't know about you guys, but it has felt like a very, very long off season. Maybe it's because of all the stuff that's changing. Maybe it's all the adjustments because you have all these teams moving to different conferences. Maybe it's because of the house settlement and how the sport will change around it, which we'll talk to Pete Nakos very shortly about that because there was news on that late last week. And also because it's that time of year that stuff happens that's not good that we end up talking about, and it's not something we want to talk about, like Ra Thomas at Georgia getting arrested on early Friday morning. We didn't have a chance to address it on the show on Friday because we didn't know about it yet, but he got arrested. He's indefinitely suspended now. 3 counts of second-degree cruelty to children, 3 counts of family violence battery. Now, we don't know what happened because there are children involved. That police report is not available to us. So we don't know exactly what happened. There was an arrest of Ra Thomas last year, if you remember correctly. It was another domestic situation. He took a pretrial diversion and had to take anger management and then moved on. Now, he missed the first 3 games last year, hurt foot apparently, but maybe not. We'll see what happens with this one, but he is currently suspended indefinitely. He was going to be a pretty big part of Georgia's plans. Now, they have plenty of other receivers. You have Dominic Lovett, who transferred from Missouri last year, Lovett looked like he was probably going to be their number 1 guy this year. But Colby Young, the transfer from Miami, a bigger guy who could possibly, fill in that role. And then, of course, they've got the guys that have been with the program. Again, it's Georgia. They're deep. But that's a situation that bears watching. Pete Nakos is going to be on shortly. We're going to talk about the house settlement and what it means for everybody because they finally got it in. Remember, there was some news that the schools were kind of being slow to approve it. Well, now they've approved it. This is the basically revenue sharing plan that they've submitted to the court, and the court has to say, yes, you can do this, or no, you can't do this. And we'll find that out sometime probably in the next month and a half. And we'll talk to Pete Nakos about that, though, because talk to some ADs, talk to some coaches about how this will work in practice. And I don't know that it's going to work the way the conference commissioners and the NCAA people who wrote it think it will. I mean, probably they know it'll actually work this way, but they wanted to write it in a different way to make it look like the NCAA might still have some control. And that's really the attempt here, is to give the NCAA back some control over NIL. Well, we'll see if that works or not, but we'll talk to Pete in depth about that. And also about the other big part of that settlement is the roster numbers changing, the roster caps. And we've talked about the situation with football where what happens to walk-ons. Now, Pete and I will get into it, but the numbers do change a little bit. So it does somewhat allow a little bit more for walk-ons than you think, or what we traditionally consider walk-ons. But it's not the same thing. And for Dabo Swinney called himself a crawl-on, basically, who's somebody who was a student at the school who showed up and is like, hey, I played football in high school. I'm trying out for this team. That's the kind of person who I don't know that there's a place for in the future. And that was me, by the way. So I still want to know more about that. And we'll talk to Pete about that. Actually, we can talk to Pete right now. We got Pete Nakos, On 3 national reporter, news hound, scoop meister, master of the Nakosification. What's up, Pete?
What's up? Similar to the NCAA, I'm in the middle of a moving process, so don't have enough background at the moment, but here we are, here to talk to Elsa.
Hey, listen, nothing wrong with a nice, clean background, Pete, but yes, Pete is moving. You're going to see him coming a lot more from the studio in Nashville at On 3 headquarters very, very soon. And, it's going to be a lot of fun. But Pete, we got to talk about this settlement. It gets handed into the judge on Friday.
Yeah.
Claudia Wilkin, this is the judge who's handled all of these NCAA cases over the years, going back to O'Bannon versus the NCAA. What does she have to do now? Like, what's her next steps with this thing?
Yeah, so this is a months-long process now. She'll review it. She needs to certify it or deny it. She's also going to be put in charge of hearing out if there's claimants, right? If there's people who want to opt out of the back damages class, and then also if there's any more appeals. We've already had the Houston Christian one. So this is the start of another long process. Expect revenue sharing and these roster caps that we're about to talk about to really start to go into effect next summer. I think we'll have a really good inkling by January if she's going to certify this or not.
So it's interesting because there's a couple parts of it. I didn't even mention the major part of it for guys who aren't playing anymore. So if you played from 2016 to now,
yeah,
you're due for back damages. And I heard I was listening to some folks at Big Ten Media, and there was a former football player who I guess his career ended like in 16 or 17. And he was saying, hey, I'm going to get some money from this thing. It's an average of $135,000 for a power conference football player. If they basically, it depends on how much did you play, where did you play. And so there is some serious money in this for the folks who already played.
So I give the example of someone like Joe Burrow, right? Like he fit perfectly in this time frame. He's going to make good money off the broadcast NIL. He's going to get the max payout for video games. He's going to get the max payout for lost opportunities probably. And then there's this pay for play category, which is really the money that collectives have dispersed right now. They're trying to make sure that former athletes, I mean, someone like him could arguably make up to $1 million if you like max out all 4 of those categories. So that's going to be a really good payday for a lot of people. As I joked with someone, some NFL stars will probably be able to buy a new vacation house off the settlement.
Yeah, I was going to say Joe Burrow, Lamar Jackson probably.
Yeah,
because Lamar won the Heisman in 2016. So yeah, this is going to be a very interesting time for and then those former players who didn't end up in the NFL. There is some cash to be made out of this, but I know what everybody wants to know about is what does this mean going forward? Explain what. I guess let's start with what's on paper. Explain what they would like to do in terms of NIL deals, because remember, everybody can pay up to 22% of the average power conference school's athletic revenue, which we think will be around $22 million.
And that's going to go up every year. It's going to jump to $20 million in year 2 and keep going.
Yeah, they think it's going to be like $33 million by the end of this 10-year settlement. Yeah. So everybody can pay that. So there will be players drawing from that. Schools don't yet know or haven't yet said exactly how much of this is going to go to football, but we've been told what between 11 million and 15 million is what we should expect.
Yep. Even maybe 17 million, just depending on what school and how it all works out.
Right, because football makes all the money.
Yeah.
And then what happens with collectives, with what we've come to know as NIL these last 3 years?
Yeah, so the settlement had a few, you'd say like chunks of text that just were not anticipated. And are they shocking? No, but they definitely changed some things, I think, moving forward. One, there's this big long graph about boosters, and it talks about how boosters have to be paying for like goods and services, and it's going to make it very clear that these athletes can't just enter into a pay for play situation. And it's also going to make clear that collectives and these boosters cannot operate on a nonprofit structure, something the IRS has already come against. Now, I don't know about jaw dropping, but the really striking thing that has come out of this is there's going to be a new structure sort of for NIL deals. If a deal's over $600, it needs to be submitted to this new NIL clearinghouse that is yet to really be established. And from there, this arbiter of sorts will have the opportunity to look at a contract, look at the details of agreement. However, the athlete does send it in, and then they'll approve it or terminate it. Now, this is something that's never happened in the last 3 years of NIL. And even more than that, Andy, I know some agents joked around on Friday night, oh, we'll do a bunch of $5.99 deals. No, if an athlete signs like with a collective, for example, and like they do multiple $400 deals that put it over that $600 threshold, contracts would still need to be sent for opportunities.
The cynic in me, Pete, when I saw the $600 number was, so $600 is, I believe, the limit where if it's over 600, you have to send a 1099 to the IRS.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, are they trying to make it where these guys don't have to send 1099s in? But no, that's not what's going on here, as you explained. Now, that's the part that we think may get challenged here. And what's interesting, so explain how this works, because it feels a little like their way of getting around collective bargaining, because you can say that these athletes, by taking the revenue share money, opted into this. They chose this.
So I talked to there's an agent, Brian Davis, on the West Coast, runs the Forward Council firm and also reps a ton of athletes, and he's already told me that him and some attorneys are already exploring ways to file a suit over this kind of practice, and whether it be on antitrust laws or just denying like free trade rights. We'll have to see how that plays out. But this is just something that we've never really seen before. And you know, the other thing too, Andy, that was pointed out to me over the weekend was, not only does this impact those like third-party collective deals, this also means like if an Amazon wants to like pay like a top star, like Emeka Ibuka already has a deal with Amazon, like that's probably going to make that partnership a little bit more complicated, because now they need to have their contract read by this third party. And then you truly start to think about, okay, like how many brands are going to want to jump through all these hoops, and then have the situation where their deal's terminated before, if they've already spent good cash on a photo shoot or something like that.
Well, and this feels like the conferences and the NCAA and the schools trying to give the NCAA some level of control back. But the thing is, like, okay, you and I have talked to, coaches, athletic directors. You've talked to people at collectives. No athletic director I've talked to has said this is how it will actually work. No. Every single one I've talked to says it's going to be the $22 million figure will be the floor.
Yep.
And then collectives will kick in additional money. And they're just, it feels like they are planning to operate as if there's no difference.
And that's how they want to operate, Andy. I mean, they understand the importance and significance that these collectives provide. And you said it earlier, but until we get collective bargaining or maybe even employment, they're still gonna be around. So I see this kind of like $600 system being significantly challenged in the courts. And that's just one lawsuit. There's gonna be so many lawsuits that come out of this settlement.
Could Wilkin just say, not this part, not this part? Is that pot, or does she go back to the plaintiff's attorneys and say, here's what I like and here's what I don't like?
She can say that. It's going to be a little bit more complicated, I think, than just like a crossing that out and crossing that out. But yeah, she will have the opportunity to really bring up some questions about language and practices she isn't supportive of.
That it's going to be so interesting. But there's another piece of it, and that's the roster caps in different sports. So we've talked about it as, and I've talked about it a lot because of, how I feel about the walk-on situation. Yeah. But the roster cap in football is now 105. So you can't have more than 105 players, but you could have 105 players on full scholarship,
right?
Which is 20 more than you had before. But how is that going to actually work? Let's say, because I imagine it's different for Alabama than that's going to work for, say, Boston College or Wake Forest.
Yeah. So you don't have to max the 105 from what I've learned, right? So you can have 95 instead of 85 or something like that. You can also give partial scholarships, right? So maybe you go all in on 95 and then also have 10 guys that maybe you want to treat as walk-ons that you get partial scholarships to.
Yeah.
It's going to be really interesting to see how it develops. The other thing too, Andy, that I don't think it's ever going to truly replicate the walk-on status that we love, but like a Matt Rhule, for example, is going to be able to have 140 guys in camp and then bring it down to 105, things like that. So that can happen. But I do understand it's not the walk-on system that college football loves.
Well, we're going to be hearing Troy Dannen, the Nebraska athletic director, later in the show, and he in our talk mentions the phrase taxi squad, which is a practice squad. It is what that is in the NFL parlance.
Yeah,
I do think there's room for that. I think there's a way to do that, and then you have your human tackling dummies like me, and it allows a place for that. But this is interesting because this is going to affect recruiting in a lot of interesting ways, because now I would assume, like in the Big Ten and the SEC, they're fully funding those 105 scholarships. And so they can take more players now.
And you know, there's always that saying, like, is it a real scholarship or like a fake scholarship, right? Like, can the 4-star quarterback accept the Ohio State scholarship, for example, or something like that? Now I think there will be more opportunities where they can. And it's going to give the top schools in the country more opportunity to stack talent.
Yeah, I think, but here's the thing, and this is the part everybody's like, oh, they're just gonna stockpile. The 22 spots on the field are what regulates that. So you're going to be so freaking busy with the transfer portal.
Yeah,
we're going to see a lot of movement.
Yep,
a lot of movement.
And that also comes with, right, that new ruling how there's like free transfers, right? Multi-time transfers can move around as much as they want, things like that. So the transfer portal is not going to slow down anytime soon. Yeah,
and now there's other sports involved in this too. So especially, I want to talk about baseball in particular. And I know we got a lot of folks in the chat, big SEC school fans, big college baseball fans, like. Going from 11.7 scholarships to 34 potential scholarships. Now, you don't have to do it.
Yeah.
But holy crap, that changes some stuff in that sport.
You know, having some conversations with some administrators, it's going to be really interesting to see how some of these other conferences approach it, right? Like, you think every SEC school is going to max that 34, but then it brings up the conversation of like, okay, like how many, like really, what's the talent pool going to look like for some of these like lower conferences, right? So do they not go all in on baseball like the SEC is definitely going to? And maybe do they make, I don't know, softball their thing, like, or do they go all in on women's volleyball, like things like that? That's going to be some big decisions and some projections I think we'll see in the future.
So, yeah, I think this is going to be really, like, the math changes so much, and it's another situation where we can't really predict how this is actually going to work,
right?
With with the recruiting, with the how they're going to fund the scholarships, and we've done this the last few years, like where we thought NIL might look a certain way, it evolved into this. This will evolve into something else. I did have a text from somebody pushing back on one of your statements, Pete, and I think it's fair. So this person said, you said you think most ADs want to operate in the way where the collectives are gonna kick it. I'm not sure I necessarily agree with that. I think they're resigned to it.
Yeah,
most of them. I don't know how many of them want it, but I just don't think there's any other. Like, I think there's still quite a few true believers who want the NCAA to have some level of control. I just don't think, unless you have collective bargaining, you can have these rules.
Yeah. I mean, that's a question I asked a lot of coaches last week at Big Ten Media Days, and a lot of them thought collectives were going to be around. I don't know if the excitement level was necessarily at like 105 when they said that.
Yeah, no, and they're not excited about the 105. I don't think they're excited about having to manage that. I do wonder, like, how many football coaches are now calling their baseball coach at their school to say, how did you manage these, partial scholarships, and how do you handle that politically with the roster?
Yep, 100%. There's some really other like huge jumps too. Like men's track went from 12.6 scholarships to 34, like things like that. Like, so all of a sudden there's going to be a lot new room for growth in a ton of other like Olympic sports. So what schools decide to fund that and who do not will be, I don't know, just something to keep an eye on.
Yeah, this is going to be fascinating. The other thing, and I talked to Jed Fish about this last week, and I want to get your take on this. With the revenue sharing, there's schools that are going to have a lot more NIL. I don't even know what we call it NIL money at this point, but they're going to have a lot more money to pay players, basically, than they've had before in the collective era, where they've had to, ask donors to give more. Now they're going to have, so like Jed Fish at Washington is probably a good example of this relative to some of these other Big Ten schools. I always think like Dave Clawson at Wake Forest, who is a great evaluator and a great developer, but they, the way they're structured, this is a small school. They're not going to have the kind of collective dollars that some of these other schools are. But if you put them, kind of in the neighborhood money wise with all these other schools, I feel like the guys who can evaluate really are going to have an advantage in that environment.
Yeah, and then all of a sudden, right, even if you take collectives out of it, if you can scout really well, then you're still going to have dollars to spend on your roster. So it's a really good mix, and I'm not quite sure if it's really going to make it a really even and equal playing field, but I think that given these new resources, it really could make an impact.
Yeah, this is going to be a wild new world here these next few, and we're already seeing it, Pete. You and I have talked about this too. So the class of 2025 is in the midst of being put together at all these schools, and you see these commitments. Remember, everybody can make NIL deal or agree to NIL deals. They can't start paying on them until the guys get to campus.
Right.
But we're seeing, or at least hearing anecdotally about, basically they're backloading these things to August of next year when they believe these payments are going to start.
Yeah. And there's some programs I've been told too, right? Ones who maybe don't have the deepest like NIL collective bank accounts, but have also now started to like talk about revenue sharing numbers and making their NIL pitch, because that can make them more competitive in some recruitments. And a lot of these deals too, I'm hearing are multi-year deals, right? Trying to factor in like what a collective can do. And then beyond that, when revenue sharing does kick in.
Yeah, this is going to be quite a time in college sports. Now we have another season to go before all of this happens, but behind the scenes, this is all happening. So now everybody knows what's going on. We've been educated.
Yep.
Thank you, Pete Nakos, and good luck with the move.
Thanks. I'll be around. I'll see you.
Pete Nakos, the man who gives you all your news, and this was a big one. This is a big one. Normally, we don't get too far into the nuts and bolts of this stuff, but everybody wants to know how this is going to work. We're trying to figure it out. And to be honest, like the coaches and the ADs are all just trying to figure it out as well, because it's all changing. Stuff can happen in the courts that they can't control. And they just want to, know, like the coaches especially, like, just tell me the rules. That's all I want to know. Just tell me what the rules are and we'll move on. But it's going to be a while before they can just say, here are the rules. This is what's going to happen. I think everybody's got an adjustment period to deal with. One guy who has done nothing but adjusting over the last year is Troy Dannen. So we don't have ADs on the show, but Troy's an interesting case. All this stuff that's happened, he's seen it through 3 different lenses in the past year. So a year ago this time, he was Tulane's AD. And so he was looking at it through the prism of an American Athletic Conference school, trying to figure out how to be competitive. And remember, Tulane had been very, very good. Tulane was coming off, last offseason was coming off a Cotton Bowl win against USC. Willie Fritz had that program rolling. They were one of the better teams in the conference. And so he gets hired at Washington. Troy Dannen gets hired at Washington. Now, that's a little bit after they decided to go to the Big Ten, but he's got to deal with the nitty-gritty of how do you prepare to move them to the Big Ten. Meanwhile, their football team goes on a magical run, wins the Pac-12, beats Texas in the playoff, goes to the national title game. Then Kalen DeBoer gets hired away by Alabama. And Troy Dannen's got to hire a football coach. Then, shortly after that, Trev Alberts goes from Nebraska to Texas A&M as the AD. And Nebraska's like, hey, Troy, we would like to hire you. Troy Dannen's from Iowa. He's always wanted to work at Iowa or Nebraska. Like, those are the dream jobs for him. So he takes the Nebraska job. And now he's in the Big Ten. Now, in terms of finances, they're at the top of the mountain. They've got everything they need. They want to win more games, but they've got the money. So Troy Dannen has seen all of this from very different places. And so I thought that perspective would be very interesting. So let's talk to Troy. We're here with Troy Dannen, the Nebraska athletic director. And I was telling Troy, we don't always get into these big picture, what's changing in the world of college sports conversations. But when I saw you, I figured we have to do this because a year ago, this time, you were the athletic director at Tulane, living in a certain neighborhood of college sports.
Yep.
Then you get hired at Washington, and you've got, they've just decided to move to the Big Ten. You've got to deal with that transition. And oh, by the way, your football team goes to the national championship game, and your coach leaves. And then the Nebraska job opens, and now here you are.
It's been a year. It's been a year.
Yeah. What is your head spinning?
It's starting to settle down a little bit. And even if you go back a year, we were coming off at Tulane, coming off a Cotton Bowl win over USC.
Yes.
So,
you haven't talked any trash here, have you?
No, I talked. I had a little trash at Washington when we went back to USC.
There you go.
But I've now swallowed that. So no bulletin board material now that I'm in the league. But no, I've seen a lot of things in the last year.
Well, and during this time of complete transformation of college sports, which how much has that changed? Like, just because you've seen it through 3 different prisms in the past year, does that change how you look at how things are changing with the House settlement, with revenue sharing, with all of the things that are coming down the pipe?
Well, sometimes your perspective is guided by where your feet are.
Right.
And so, how Tulane was going to be affected by all of this is different than even Washington. And I think Washington, Nebraska, even a little bit different. So, there's a part of this, and how do you advocate for the greater good of the whole?
Yeah.
And a part of it, like what's in the best interests of
your
University
school
of Nebraska.
Yeah.
And sometimes what gets us in a problem is we're all very provincial animals.
Right.
And when I'm thinking about Nebraska and Pat's thinking about Penn State and Ward's thinking about Michigan, we kind of get nowhere. And so at least as I'm speaking now, I kind of feel like I have a little better perspective because I can speak to the impacts on almost every segment of college athletics.
So as you're looking at this, I go back to your first press conference as the Nebraska AD, where you came out and said very strongly, hey, if you're not supporting NIL, if you're not understanding that this is a very important part of the ecosystem that we need to take care of, then you're behind. And it felt like you were trying to kind of give a wake-up call.
Yeah, sometimes we want to romanticize the past and quit worrying about the present. And what happened to, the romance 20 years from now, the romance of college athletics is going to be today. Right now, it's what happened.
It's whatever happened when you were 14 or whatever. Yeah.
That's exactly right. But what had to happen, the 5 national championships that Nebraska's won were won under a different model,
right?
In a different environment, a different era. And we're not chasing those 5 championships. we're chasing Michigan last year. We're chasing Ohio State. We're chasing Georgia. So what do you do to chase it? The world in college athletics is now evolved into X.
Yeah.
NIL.
Yep.
And it's going to evolve into revenue sharing next year.
Right. I was going to ask you, because that message, while timely, might not be so timely if you deliver it in 2026.
Well, and one of the things I felt we needed to do at Nebraska was get people comfortable in the fact that we're going to be compensating, whether it's through NIL or whether it's through revenue share or maybe down the line employment.
Yeah.
We're going to be compensating. It doesn't make the game worse. It doesn't make it better. It doesn't mean you need to turn away from it. But so I'm going to need their support.
Yeah.
Today I needed an NIL. Next year I'm going to need a revenue sharing model.
Where your chancellor didn't just, there's not a button where they can shock you if you use the E word. I heard the E word. So I just,
obviously the courts are going to decide that more than
Right.
one individual, but you have to look around the corner of what might be next.
yeah.
And while we're still trying to operationalize this revenue sharing model, there are a lot of court cases out there that could render it moot
Right.
down the line as well. So how do we prepare ourselves for what that eventuality may be?
Now, you've always been somebody who was thinking about these things. And, a lot of it was at Tulane, and you were trying to figure out how to put Tulane in the best possible place. Now that you're at a place like Nebraska, where your voice is pretty loud in this environment, how much do you feel like you should advocate for what your vision of the future should be?
So I've got a lot of perspectives from the Transformation Constitution Committee time, and inside the Big Ten room, I think my role is to just talk not on behalf of Nebraska, Tulane, but to just talk about maybe devil's advocate here are the consequences of this, here are the consequences of that, and make sure we discuss all of those areas. The one thing in college athletics right now, I think Charlie Baker's doing a great job. Charlie doesn't have a lot of power because of the structure of the governance model, but we're all looking out for each other.
Yeah.
Institutions are, leagues are, and the NCAA, who is charged to look out for the greater good, really doesn't even have that opportunity from a regulatory standpoint to do that. So I think, and it happens a lot in the Big Ten room, what is the greater good? Now, we want to put the Big Ten in the best possible position.
Yeah.
But the best possible position is not the Big Ten and nothing else existing.
Right.
So how does the model stay in place in some way, shape, or form?
So you were coming to the Big Ten one way or the other, whether you were Washington or at Nebraska. What was that period like of transition at Washington? What goes into a conference transition for an athletic director?
Well, I got to Washington about 30 days after the commitment to join this year. And so it was fast tracked. USC and UCLA had a couple of years. Washington, Oregon had less than one. So really was trying to figure out the finances. But there was still a lot with the athletes. I met with every team, and now we're asking the athletes, instead of going to Cal and Stanford, you're going to go to Rutgers in Maryland. You're going to go across 4 time zones. You're going to take red eyes. It's going to be challenging. So the interesting thing, the athletes, so excited. And I thought there might be a little more hesitancy with the athletes for the travel, but there's new, right?
Yeah.
They're going to different time
places, different people to compete against. Yeah.
Getting different exposure. And, sometime I think, and I saw this just in the short time I was at Washington, you do get a little out of sight and out of mind pretty quickly. And this is going to keep the West Coast schools in sight and in mind.
Yeah.
Where that hadn't happened. So there was a lot of financial planning for the transition. There's still, you have to have a production studio because of the Big Ten network.
Right.
It didn't exist on campus because the Pac-12 schools used a central facility.
Right.
So just little things like that a lot of things that had to happen and had to happen quickly.
Now, Nebraska, there are things that have to happen. I understand that Matt Rhule, the football coach, has given you a 17-item action list. How are we doing on that list, by the way?
It's that list happens almost every place.
Yeah.
I kind of been making a point of it that first hour I was there, he said, these are the things we need to do to have success. And, I work for the coach. Coach didn't work for me. Yeah. I work for the coach.
I'm glad you understand that. I don't know that most ADs do, but that is how it works in most places.
Well, and it's not from you have more authority, you make more money than I do. It is, the job of the AD is to put somebody in a position to succeed.
Right.
And you don't do this. I don't coach football. You don't do that by telling Matt Rhule how to coach or what to do. So, it was important to me to know what Matt thought, having been at Nebraska for a year. He's had great success. He's climbed the mountain. So what needs to happen here? It gave me a great head start.
Yeah.
And then, that list gets bigger. And then there's some things on that list. Matt, now, is this really going to help us win? But if you look at everything through a context, does it help us win?
Yeah.
And does it help put our kids in a good position?
Yeah.
Those lists are invaluable.
Well, we were talking about this before we started. I'm very interested in what happens at Nebraska, because it does feel like this is a year where the football program should take a nice step forward. And I've said since NIL became a thing that the player who helps Nebraska take that step, whoever it is, whether it's Dylan Ryle, whoever, I hope it's like Nash Huntmarker. I like the big guys to get it. But that person is going to do so well in what you guys call real NIL. Like, it feels like that state is just dying to have the next Nebraska star.
The level of care in the state and ownership in the state for Husker athletics, in some ways it's a different level of pressure because you're representing 1.9 million people.
Yeah.
They're all Huskers.
Yeah.
And they all own it and they all love it. They all care for it. I found this out. I do a weekly radio show. We do a 5-night-a-week radio show in the state of Nebraska that's broadcast through the entire state. I have a weekly show of my own. That just shows how much people care and want to hear from Nebraska athletics. So to your point, when good things happen, there are going to be a long list of people that are going to embrace those who make those good things.
Oh,
happen.
yeah. And how do you adjust as revenue sharing comes down the pipe? How do you adjust the relationship with the collective, how all of that works?
Well, part of the collective was we need to get people comfortable, as I said, with giving money that's going to support the athletes. The collective is going to be in place, I think, when the revenue sharing model comes in. I don't know what form it's going to take,
right?
But there's going to be some role now that the collectives have been established. But for us, every time we've had a new expense item, we found a way to grow revenues.
Mm-hmm.
None of us have a $21 million surplus,
no.
So it's not a matter of
new college football playoff contract.
It's a year. It drags a year.
Okay, all right,
but it's still not that much.
Yeah.
So this is one of those times when at athletics we actually are going to have to manage the bottom line expenses.
Right.
And so there's going to be some hand wringing and tumult on campuses as we figure out how to provide for the top and we all tier sports, whether you want to say it or not, or it feels good or not. You all tier. Well, you're going to see it obviously in how the revenue sharing money is allocated to sports, and it's going to feel even more tiered.
And I'm sure you're prepared for the action items from your various coaches, not just Matt Rhule.
Well, yeah. And the great thing about coach, every coach is a type A personality.
Oh yeah.
And so
their team's the most important team,
and
no matter what.
They are going to want to make sure that they're supported in the way that their other peers in the league are going to be supported.
Yeah.
And so some of those are going to be challenging discussions and awkward discussions, but part of it is you also have to lay out this is not a penalty, but this is the why. And this is how, the fact that we have money to the 21 million to share, 90%, 92% of that comes from football.
Yeah.
And so there's a preponderance of that money is going to get allocated to football, and we want all of our teams to win. But more importantly than that, all of the experiences of the athletes have to be good.
Yeah. Because you still want them coming.
I still want them coming. I still want them graduating, and I still want them to have a great experience while they're at Nebraska.
And the thing that's fascinating to me is it's not always football. You guys sold out your football stadium for a volleyball game. I mean, it feels like if you can create the right program, the right environment, the people will come. The fan base will find it.
It doesn't matter what it is in life. When things are an event, people want to be a part of it.
Yeah.
When it's just a game, we can.
But if your volleyball program hadn't been great for years and years and years, that's not something everybody's going to do.
That's exactly right. Yeah. But it goes back to ownership. People care.
Yeah.
I would tell you, I think the volleyball players are bigger celebrities than the football athletes are.
I would agree that. Yeah.
In Nebraska, I've seen security with our volleyball team. When I got there, they said, here's what you get for tickets for football.
Rev sharing NIL deal. I don't know. Well, this might violate the employment things. Might be like a work study thing. Defensive linemen as security for the volleyball team.
There's always an opportunity.
We're all about synergy here, Troy.
And I think we found there's always a way to do about anything.
Yeah.
But when I got to Nebraska, they said, here are your football tickets, here are your basketball tickets, and you only get 4 volleyball tickets that don't ask for any more.
And you're the AD.
And so it told me right away what volleyball was.
Well, every school is its own unique ecosystem, but Nebraska feels like just a completely different place. And you worked a lot of places. You Northern Iowa, we mentioned Tulane, Washington. What makes Nebraska special?
Well, I think that ownership, I saw it from afar growing up in Iowa. I always thought, boy, that Nebraska, it's something different, you know.
And at that time, they are kings of the world in football.
I mean, I would read their newspaper and they would win 35-7 and be upset that they gave up 7 or
That's right.
only scored 35. But it is their team. It is the state's team.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of places though where they don't have professional sports, but they don't have the ownership of the team. And I think those national championships and what Devaney and Coach Osborne did, and even what Frank did, it gave people a sense of this is mine. And people, I don't want to say live and die by it, but when people care enough about it, that it helps in their mind define their own lives.
Yeah.
There is something special about it. It doesn't happen every place in that way. And you can argue sometimes maybe it's a good thing, maybe it's a bad thing. I will tell you there's nothing that beats a high give-it-arm factor. And Nebraska has not been to a bowl game in several years. And the stadium is
still full. Still care.
396 consecutive sellouts.
Yep. And
people still care about it just the way they did yesterday. And I don't know if that'll happen tomorrow, right? And part of our job is to break that streak and get people to embrace success. But people just grew up owning the program as if it was their own.
Well, I got a good feeling you're breaking the streak this year, so we'll see.
We've got the right guy. Matt Rhule is a whale of a coach. He's done a good job of getting the program built. That list is 17. My guess he had his own list of about 117.
Yeah, I figured it was pared down a little bit.
Yeah, before I got to the 17. So he's done this before at places that I think were harder to do than at Nebraska. So I look forward to what lies ahead.
Thank you, Troy. Appreciate it. Nebraska AD Troy Dannen. And yeah, I do think they're breaking that bowl streak this year. You look at Nebraska's schedule, it is very advantageous. They got a nice draw in the Big Ten. That Colorado game week 2 is the big one. If they can win that one, then I think you're talking about a pretty good run there and a good chance that they are bowl eligible by the time they play Ohio State in game number 8. Now that at Indiana, you saw Kirk Cignetti. If you saw the Kirk Cignetti interview last week, or you saw him talking at Big Ten Media Days, I'm telling you right now, Indiana's going to get somebody. I don't know who it's going to be. Maybe it's Nebraska. Maybe it's somebody down the line. But Indiana's going to get somebody. And Indiana also kind of similar to Nebraska in that they've got a bunch of winnable games up until they run into Ohio State later in the schedule. Now, Indiana's got Ohio State and Michigan back-to-back. There's an open date in between those games. But those are all games that should be very competitive in. Maryland, Northwestern, we don't know what they're going to be this year. Both of them are adjusting to things. Northwestern, you're going to hear from David Braun, the Northwestern coach, later this week. He's a fascinating guy, too. He gets thrown into that situation last year. Remember David Braun at Big Ten Media Days last year? Basically, getting questions that he just couldn't answer because he'd been on the job essentially a week where Pat Fitzgerald got fired. Braun had been hired as the defensive coordinator, came from North Dakota State. He'd been there since January. He's dealing with all of the fallout from this stuff. Just had a phenomenal first year. And if you watch them play Rutgers in week 1, you'd have thought, oh my gosh, they're never going to win a game. They end up winning 8. They end up beating Utah in a bowl game. It was impressive. It was an impressive coaching job. He's made hires on the offensive side of the ball now to better reflect what he would like to have happen. This is a team that won a lot of close games last year. we'll see. But again, their early schedule, like you look at the first half of their schedule, it gets gnarly on the back half because they got Wisconsin, at Iowa, Ohio State, Michigan. But they got a chance to start out hot. And like Northwestern at Washington, that fourth game for Northwestern, that's a big game for both those teams. That's one both those teams are going to need. And so, again, we're getting to this deal. I don't envy the folks, and this may be me sometime this month, who have to predict the results of every game, because I've seen a few people who cover various conferences say we predicted the results of every single conference game, and it's tough. It's tough, and this when you realize, oh wait, somebody's got to win this one, somebody's got to lose this one. There are going to be some tough seasons. There are going to be some seasons that where we thought a team was going to be this. Couple bounces of the ball, all of a sudden it's a very different year. But David Braun's a really interesting coach too. So there's a lot going on in the Big Ten this year. There's a lot of very intriguing programs. It feels like the better schedule. Now, we mentioned Iowa has a good schedule, but Nebraska got a good draw. Rutgers got a good draw. There's a few schools that could have pretty good records here. So we'll see how they go. Another one that intrigues me a lot is Wisconsin, because when Luke Fickell took the job from Cincinnati, my thought was, okay, Wisconsin is thinking about these things differently. Wisconsin has opened the checkbook. Wisconsin has said, we are going to compete for the Big Ten title, not the Big Ten West title. And he hires Phil Longo as the offensive coordinator. So clearly a huge change from what Wisconsin had been doing. And really, they'd been doing it since Barry Alvarez. It went Barry Alvarez, Brett Bielema. When Gary Anderson was there, they ran basically the same offense. They still were very much a power run football team, line up and just try to knock you out. And then, of course, Paul Chryst, who had been a Wisconsin guy, he came in and did the same thing. Luke Fickell decided, hey, got to do something different, because it's not about beating Illinois, Iowa, Minnesota anymore. It's about trying to beat everybody. And you saw that team last year. Now, the injuries certainly caused a problem. When Tanner Mordecai got hurt, they were just out of sorts. I didn't think they had enough speed at the receiver position. And I do think with this offense, the better you can throw, the better you can run. We've seen it back when Sam Howell was North Carolina's quarterback and Phil Longo was running North Carolina's offense. When Sam Howell had a lot of weapons in the pass game, it opened up the run game because they could just run into very light boxes. And there was a year, I believe it was 2020, Virginia Tech and Miami just could not do anything with their run game. And it was because they also couldn't do anything with their pass game. But Phil Longo would just run the ball as long as it was working. And in those particular games, I believe they averaged over 10 yards a carry against Miami, and I believe they were over 9 against Virginia Tech. And that's the thing I keep waiting to see with this Wisconsin team, because given what they have on the offensive line, given what they usually have in the backfield, if you can really get the passing game going, then you should be able to hand off over and over and over again, because you've now scared the defense into playing you honestly, and you have the beef up front that if they are playing you with a 6-man box or even a 7-man box, you should be able to run into that and gain yards. We're going to find out a lot about Wisconsin when Alabama comes to town. I'm not worried about them beating Alabama. I don't think they're going to. But my question is, how do they compete against USC? How do they compete against Penn State? How do they compete against Iowa? How do they compete against Nebraska? Where is Wisconsin relative to that? Because you look at Wisconsin in the Paul Chryst era, the early part of it, in the Brett Bielema era. This is one of the best programs in the Big Ten. And I don't know if it wasn't always a matter of just feasting on the Big Ten West, because some of that was pre-division. Some of that was leaders and legends, where the divisions were mixed up a little bit. Some of it was Big Ten West. But I do think it's possible for Wisconsin to be in that elite group in the Big Ten. They have to be faster as a team. They have, but still have to be able to block as well as they always did. They still have to prioritize developing those offensive linemen. And I think that's the key there. We were lucky enough last week to sit down with one of those offensive linemen, Jack Nelson, the left tackle for Wisconsin. Talk to him about what it's like being an offensive lineman at Wisconsin, what it's like being an offensive lineman at Wisconsin in this offense. Here's Jack. Welcome. Jack Nelson from Wisconsin. Left tackle, which, I mean, okay, you grew up in Wisconsin.
Yep.
What does it mean to be the left tackle at Wisconsin?
You just got to make sure you're ready for that pass rush, I think. I mean, just, if you got a right-handed quarterback, everybody knows. You've seen the blind side.
Yep.
They're not looking. You got to make sure you're protecting them over there.
What's it like, when you're younger, you're watching the Badgers play, are the old linemen just the rock stars of the group as you're growing up?
Well,
is Michael Dieter
if you grew up in my household, yeah. Yeah, I mean, my dad played O-line.
Yeah.
I always played O-line. My younger brothers play O-line,
Yep.
so, we're always watching them. What's the latest with the Wisconsin O-line, So, yeah.
And I mean, now previously, in the previous iteration, those guys were also, it was the pass blocking, but also you were running downhill. You
Yep.
were running straight at people. How much did that change when this offense changed? How much did what you do change?
It's certainly, certainly pass the ball more.
Mm-hmm.
That being said, though, during the game, there's definitely times you're like, okay, we're definitely relying on the run here.
Yeah.
I mean, Coach Longo does a fantastic job with the offense, but he'll tell you himself, this whole air raid stuff.
Mm-hmm.
It's not like we're never going to run the ball again, but there's definitely times where I'm like, oh, there's run play after run play after run play after run play. So
Has he quoted Bruce Lee to you yet?
probably.
Be water. I asked him about that once.
Yes.
Be like water.
He has.
Yes.
Multiple times.
Which
Yes.
is just take what the defense gives you, but it sounds more mystical coming from Bruce Lee, I guess. But,
No doubt.
But that's the thing I do love about Phil Longo's offense. Like, I remember when he was at North Carolina, they had a couple of games where they were averaging 10 yards a carry, and he's just like, we'll keep running the ball. No problem.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I mean, like he says, be water, just go with it. And so, whatever that defense has shown us, whatever's working that day, he'll call it and we'll run it.
Yeah, I mean, was it an adjustment in terms of conditioning last year, getting used to that?
The tempo?
Yeah, the tempo.
Absolutely.
How do you get yourself ready for that? Is there a way in the summer to do it?
Well, obviously with the new strength and conditioning staff, Coach Brady does a fantastic job. We'll do all sorts of sprints and stadiums and conditioning stuff like that. But I think I remember the first spring ball with the new staff. We're doing sets of 4 plays during team, and after those 4 plays, I'd come out and I'd need an oxygen mask or something.
Yeah.
I was just gassed beyond belief because it's just so quick.
Oh, yeah.
But then, we get into this fall camp and we're running, 8-play drives during team, and it's not hard at all.
Okay.
So it's definitely kind of taper into it.
So you never had the barfing as badges of honor thing?
No, but I felt like it before.
I was
that's
going to
for
say,
sure.
the Tennessee guys are funny about that. The ones who, when Josh Heupel got there and they were running the super tempo, and it got to where, like, the one guy barfs in the Alabama game, and they're also used to it. They're just like,
Oh, yeah.
And you see the Alabama D-line just like,
Yeah.
no.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that being said, though, I think the tempo really has you can feel it when, we really start picking up the pace.
Yeah.
And the defense just isn't used to it, and they're getting gassed.
Oh, yeah. So we got to talk about these boots. This is a great look because, in the NIL era, we've seen the quality of kicks has gone up at media days. But a lot of it is these hideous shoes that cost like $900 a pair. You're wearing boots.
Yep.
Like, how long have you had these? Are they favorites or?
Yeah, so I always wanted a pair of cowboy boots. I
Okay.
like watching westerns. I think it's cool. And then I think that was not last year, but the year before with the Guaranteed Rate Bowl in Arizona, and I went to the Tacova store.
Nice.
And I'm looking at all these boots, and I just figured if I'm going to buy a pair of cowboy boots, I got to get ostrich ones.
Of course.
And then I saw the fake ones, and I was like, you can tell. You can tell.
Oh, yeah,
so, I decided to get them, and I love them.
Nice. So, all right, you grew up in Wisconsin. You're boot wearing.
Yep.
You're licensed scuba diver.
Yeah.
for all the oceans around Wisconsin.
Yeah.
Like, where have you gone diving?
Well, we you go through this big class in a pool, and then we went to Devil's Lake. It was actually pretty cool because there's some that you just go down there, and they've got there's old carriages down there that fell back over the ice a long time ago.
Wow.
And all sorts of stuff. It's just a different world down there.
I love that you get scuba certified and go diving up, in the cold.
Yeah.
It's incredible.
Yeah.
And you also work on cars?
I do.
What is your what's the history behind that?
Yeah.
Is that something you and Dad did, or?
Yeah, well, just not really cars, but in particular, but just really anything with
Engines.
an engine. Yeah.
Okay.
So, when I was in high school, me, my dad, my younger brother, we would kind of our thing was Craigslist deals, going out on Craigslist and finding something for a couple $1,000 that was a piece of junk, and then you get it and mess with it, and then you sell it and get something new.
Just get it working again?
Exactly.
Like, what kind of engines were you buying?
Oh, I had back in high school, I bought a 93 Bronco.
Okay.
And so, I kind of cleaned that up and learned through the process of sanding it and painting it.
Oh, so you did the whole...
Oh, yeah.
Oh, man.
Yeah, but I mean...
And that's a classic.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I wish I would have kept it.
There's one in my neighborhood. There's like an early 90s Bronco.
Oh, really?
And every time I drive past, I'm like, ooh, man.
They're cool.
They did some work on that thing.
They're cool. Oh,
So,
yeah.
What is that like, that process of you find something and it's done, it's dead, and you bring it back to life?
Well, I mean, it can be painful. That's for sure. I mean, my little brother on the team, Barrett, he'll tell you. But it's more about, just started when I was in high school. I didn't have a ton of money to spend, but I, wanted some horsepower or something. So, I'd go find something for cheap that wasn't very pretty or barely ran. And then, couldn't pay someone to fix it, so you had to fix it yourself.
What is that feeling like when you finally get it to crank? When it's
It's the best. The best. It's amazing.
all right, that feeling versus your one-on-one, like I know this situation doesn't happen all that often, but you're one-on-one with a D end. It's a run play. It's not a reach. Like you're just blocking him head up, and you put him on the ground.
Oh, I mean, that's a different feeling on its own. I mean, there's nothing like it on this earth to just move somebody against their will and just to finish them in the dirt. And then it's just, I won, you lost, everybody knows it, But I mean, on the contrary, there's times where, you'll get caught. And so it's definitely a balance, and it's, it's something I live to do.
I was going to say that as an offensive lineman, you can't wind up on your back. That's just, that's against the rules. But yeah, getting beat for a sack, getting blocked in basketball, I think those are among the more humiliating things in sports.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. But you have that pancake.
Oh, yeah.
As
I'll get
the
you back.
counterbalance.
Yeah, I'll get you back. Yeah.
All right. Well, I appreciate it. Thank you so much, Jack.
Thank you very much.
Thanks. That was awesome. Jack Nelson from Wisconsin. I love that. You either end up on your back or you don't. Football takes a lot of the politics out of sports. You don't have to worry about it. It's something. It's funny. I tell my kid as he starts his first football practice today, I'm like, it's not like some of these other sports where you got to worry about, is the coach's kid going to do this? And maybe quarterback is like that. But really, when you play on the line, you kind of have to be one of the better players to play, or it becomes very obvious right away. And I'm seeing in the chat, everybody loved Jack. We're going to have Jack back on because he's awesome. He really is. And I find that when you talk to O-linemen around the country, it's very similar. Their mindset is similar. They think a certain way. They just have a different outlook on life compared to other people. And I don't know if it's a case of you play a position that doesn't really ever get any credit and people don't notice when you do well, or as you play a position where everybody has to work as one for the thing to work. But it's just a different way of looking at the world. And I find that it sort of bleeds into everyday life for those guys. So going to love watching him play. Very excited to watch Wisconsin play. How different is the roster? What did Luke Fickell do this offseason? You saw him on the show. We had him here about 6 weeks, 2 months ago, and he was talking about how he wasn't sure culturally they were where they thought he would be. I think he looked at the program and how many games they'd won over the recent years and thought, this will be fine. All these players are exactly the kind of players that will love my style of coaching and what we do. And it didn't turn out that way. but it seems like they feel a little more confident now. Tyler Van Dyke comes in from Miami to play quarterback. We are going to find out what happens with him because, there was about a 6-week period when he was young. I go back to Manny Diaz's last year as Miami's head coach. Like Tyler Van Dyke he looked like the best quarterback in the ACC. And then you had injuries, you had changes in offensive coordinator, you had change, like all kinds of different changes for him. And it just didn't work out at Miami. But could he return to that form in a different league, in an offense that fairly similar to the one that Shannon Dawson is running at Miami now? So he should be fairly familiar with what they want. But all of that up in the air. We're going to find out a lot more this week. Team starting practice. We're almost there, guys. Almost there. We'll talk to you tomorrow.